Many ancient Greek rituals were later described as immoral, chaotic, and even dangerous. Their participants were portrayed as irrational, excessive, corrupted by strange gods and forbidden practices. To later observers, these rites appeared scandalous and even disturbing, and so they had to be erased. The temples were dismantled, the sanctuaries were abandoned, the statues were defaced, the libraries were burned, the texts were suppressed, the words were redefined, the philosophers were persecuted, and their schools closed down. And the final symbolic blow came in 529 CE, when the Platonic Academy, the intellectual heart of pagan philosophy, was shut down by imperial decree. For centuries after, what followed was silence. The old ways faded from public life, new beliefs became normal, and memory was adjusted. And yet, nothing truly vital disappears forever. As the ancient poet Menander wrote, «Άγει δε προς φως την αλήθειαν χρόνος». Time brings truth to light. And Sophocles writes, «Αλ ουδέν έρπει ψεύδος εις γύραν χρόνου». No lie can keep crawling for too long in the passage of time. Even when memory is reshaped, some fragments will remain. Some habits will survive, some words will endure, and things can be reshaped under a different context than what had once been sacred. It can become suspicious, and what had once been revered, it can become obscene. At the very center of this transformation, we can find one single word, and it is one of the most scandalous words in the modern world, orgy. Now imagine telling someone that this very word, orgy, once described sacred rituals that were intended to transform the soul, the human soul. We're not talking about excess, we're not talking about decadence, we are talking about initiation. The word orgy comes from the Greek word Orgion, and in classical antiquity, these órgia were not parties, they were secret rites of transformation. To understand this, we must enter an entirely different way of thinking, one which words were not just random labels, they were organa, instruments, tools of perception, maps of reality. And once we begin following this linguistic trail of a single root, org and erg, something amazing happens. An entire philosophy of action, creation, and inner awakening are hidden inside the very language itself. The root of action, Ergon. At the very center of this family of words, we have one of the most important terms in Greek philosophy, Ergon. Ergon is usually translated as work or deed, but in Greek thought, Ergon meant something much deeper. It referred to the characteristic activity that expresses the true nature of a thing. Aristotle asks, what is the ergon of a knife? To cut. What is the ergon of the eye? To see. And what is the ergon of a human being? We're not talking here about just survival, not pleasure. We're talking about the rational, conscious, creative activity, the life of a soul that is in accordance with reason, beauty, and proportion. Ergon is not labor, it is fulfillment through function, the moment potential becomes reality. Organon, the instrument of expression. From ergon, we have organon. Organon is an instrument, a tool, a means by which action becomes possible. A musical instrument is an organon. A surgical tool is an organon. Even the body itself can be seen as the organon of the soul. Without an organon, power remains inert. A musician without an instrument cannot produce music. A thinker without language cannot even think, cannot express thought. So, organon is the bridge between capacity and manifestation. As Aristotle writes, for art must use its instruments, and the soul must use the body. Just as a craft cannot produce anything without tools, the soul cannot act without the body. The body is not a prison, it is an organon, an instrument through which perception, movement, experience, thought, creation become possible. In Aristotle's philosophy, the soul is the form, the organizing principle, while the body is the matter that is shaped by it. They are not separate entities, they are joined together, they form a single living reality.
Most people are not listening to reality, they are listening to noise and calling it thought. The Greek word for soul, psyche, comes from a verb meaning to breathe, to animate, to give life. Psyche is not something trapped inside the body, it is what makes the body a living being. To have psyche is to be alive, to possess an inner nature, a physis. Socrates gives us a great explanation of the soul in Plato's Cratylus. He suggests that psyche is named because it carries and holds nature. Physis, οχή και έχει, that which bears and sustains life itself. The verb οχέω means to carry, to transport, to convey, to uphold, to sustain. It can also mean to carry something as a vehicle, which is why the Greek word for vehicle, όχημα, comes from the same root. The second verb, έχει, from έχω, means to have, to hold, to maintain, to contain. The soul then is both the bearer of life and the power that holds it together. Without psyche, the body is not a person, only matter. Ancient Greek thinkers did not treat soul, mind, and spirit as interchangeable terms. Psyche, the soul, was the principle of life itself. It is what makes a body alive and capable of sensation, desire, and movement. Nous, the intellect, is not simply the mind, it is not the brain, it is not everyday thinking, and it is not this internal chatter that we all have. It is the faculty by which human beings grasp truth. It is the capacity to perceive meaning, order, and the invisible structure of reality. Pneuma is spirit, and it literally means breath. It is the vital force that animates and sustains life. For the Greeks, life, awareness, and vitality were not one single thing, but three interwoven dimensions of a living being. And the initiatory traditions aimed at transforming the entire human being, body, soul, intellect, and vital force. So, to be alive for the ancient Greeks was not merely to exist, but to participate in a layered reality of body, soul, intellect, and living force. Imagine a radio receiver. The device itself is the body. The electrical power that makes it function is the vital force, the pneuma. The system that converts invisible signals into audible sound is the soul, the psyche. And the meaning carried by the broadcast, the music, the voice, the message, that is the intellect, the Nous. Remove the power and the device becomes just silent, just matter. Remove the receiver and the signal cannot be heard. Remove the program and there is nothing to understand. So for the ancient Greeks, a human being was something similar. Body, life force, soul, and intellect. Not separate entities, but dimensions of a single living reality. But there is one more element. Even when all parts are intact, you still may hear nothing, because a receiver must be tuned. If the frequency is off, you hear only noise, static, distortion, fragments. The signal is there, but it cannot be received. Ancient Greek thinkers believed the same about human consciousness. Truth is not manufactured by the mind, it is perceived when the inner instrument is aligned. Most of what we call thinking is not clear perception, it is interference. Plato described three primary sources of inner interference. The appetitive part of the soul, desire that pulls attention towards pleasure, fear, and attachment. The spirited part, anger, pride, competition, this generates emotional turbulence. And finally, there is noise entering from outside, the opinions of others, of social pressure, of propaganda, of constant stimulation. When all of these dominate, the Nous cannot perceive clearly. Not because truth is absent, but because the signal is drowned out. So philosophy for the Greeks was not merely speculation, it was the art of tuning the instrument of the soul, to reduce noise, to restore alignment, to make perception possible again. So the goal was not to fill the mind with information and beliefs, it was to clear the instrument so that reality could be perceived directly. To live kataphysin, according to nature, meant to function in harmony with the structure of reality itself. To live paraphysin, against your nature, meant distortion, imbalance, and inner noise. Most people do not lack intelligence. They lack clarity, and philosophy is tuning.
The craftsman cannot shape without tools, cannot shape wood if he doesn't have tools. The musician cannot produce sound without an instrument. So in the same way, the soul cannot manifest life without the body. The body is not an obstacle, it is an instrument. Orgy, the inner force. Another member of this family is Orgy. Orgy is usually translated as anger, but originally it meant something much deeper. An internal surge, an impulse, a force that is rising from within. Anger is only one form this energy can take. In its broader sense, orgy is what makes a person to act. It is not distraction. It is a process that is pushing something towards an action. Uncontrolled rage, it is not just loss of temper, it is unrefined energy, a pressure that is building within the psyche that bursts out before it can be transformed into intention. Something inside the person is demanding expression, but because it has no form, it emerges as chaos. So in this sense, rage is not the opposite of action. It is action that has not yet been shaped. It is not weakness. It is power without a conscious direction.
For example, Wikipedia here, okay, it's in Greek, says that Orgy is a powerful ethical emotion that is being characterized by a combination of surprise, disgust, and anger, usually as a reaction to some kind of serious insult, I guess. And then Wiktionary in English, again, rage, anger, wrath. Let's go and visit an ancient Greek dictionary. And here in ancient Greek we have orgy, which simply did not mean anger. It meant a natural impulse, an inner drive, emotional force, temperament, even panic induced by the divine presence of Pan. Orgy, a natural impulse towards something, an outward drive or pushing of the senses, a person's temperament or disposition, a psychological state, character, emotions, civic emotions, social dispositions, any intense emotion or passion. I give myself to it. Disposition towards anger, being quick-tempered, etc. And then panic, fear, the terror attributed to the influence of Pan. Let's pause here for a second, because this is the second time we see it about Pan. Before, the lexicon was saying induced by the divine presence of Pan. This is not poetic language, this is technical. Sudden, overwhelming terror was called panic, and still is called panic. It is the fear of Pan. So Pan was not just a rustic god. Let's say, for the sake of this explanation here, Pan is a lot of things, but let's keep it simple. He embodied raw, untamed life force. Nature before domestication, before civilization imposed form. And panic is not simply fear, it is a divinely sent terror. It is a sacred disturbance of the human psyche. This is why the phenomenon was attributed to the presence of Pan himself. A panic attack, what is it? We can understand a panic attack as unprocessed inner energy, instinct erupting into consciousness, the psyche that is losing its usual structures, and the body reacting before the mind can even interpret. So in this sense, panic is not meaningless chaos, it is intensity without form. You see how it is connected with Orgy. Now to the Greeks, such experiences were not just pathological, they were encounters with something greater than what we would call the ordinary self. It is a sudden eruption of the wild forces that underlie both nature and human existence. So we have this expression, the presence of Pan. Something within you has broken, and something beneath the surface is there, something primal, unmediated, and deeply alive. So the symbolism, what it suggests is that such terror is paradoxically sacred because it is stripping away illusion. And the individual has to confront it, has to confront fundamental realities, depth, vulnerability, even mortality, and the raw fact of being alive. So in this sense, panic is not only fear, it's a call to awareness. It is something inside you that demands to be seen, and you are not seeing it yet. So it is a call to self-observation. and another one, oργή, from the verb rezo, to do, to act, hence Ergon, did work, or from ωρέγω, to desire, to reach towards something, meaning that which prevent us from deliberating properly, or from manifesting anger or wrath, hidden anger, and then underneath, οργεώνες, a group or association of men, such as clansmen or members of a fratry. They are called so from their common performance of sacred rites and sacrifices to the gods, especially those connected with Orgia, mystical sacred ceremonies.
Ωρέγομαι, reaching towards something. Closely related to οργή is another word, which is ωρέγομαι. Ωρέγομαι means to stretch out, to reach towards something, to even when I fancy to eat something, it is a wish, it is an extension towards the pursuit of something. So if οργή is the surge of energy within, ωρέγομαι is that energy that is taking direction, something inside the person that has found a target, a possibility, an opening. So at this stage, the force is no longer blind, it is no longer in hiatus, it becomes striving. The hand will reach to take something, for example. So what's the deeper meaning here? The psyche projects itself beyond its present state, and this is the moment when potential becomes pursuit. And this applies to everything, from what we're going to eat, to all of our emotions, to reaching goals and higher objectives. So when consciously observed, the energy can start becoming intention. So we have uncontrolled rage, depression, excessive emotions, excessive desire. This is all energy that it's being projected outward without a name. Ωρέγομαι is what will start gathering all of this, and then focus and self-observation is what will convert this chaos into order. So the same force that could destroy becomes the capacity of creation. Rage is energy escaping. Ωρέγομαι is energy choosing a direction, and when force finds a target, it becomes will. Ωρέγομαι is the moment when the human being stops reacting and begins seeking and acting. It is the first movement of transcendence. Because to reach towards something higher is already to move beyond what one used to be already. And at this point, we approach something even deeper. In Greek philosophy, this directed longing towards what is beautiful, meaningful, complete, has a name, Eros. Eros is not love, and it is not just romantic attraction. It is the very cosmic force that draws all beings toward fulfillment and unity. Now, the whole idea of Eros deserves a video on its own, and I'm planning to do it, but I will do it as an episode of a new series that I'm working on, which is on cosmogony. Γεωργία, work upon the earth. Now we have another word here that is very revealing, and this is γεωργία. Γε, from yeah, earth, Ergon, work. So we have work upon the earth, agriculture. But think about this here. What the agricultural process actually does. You dig the soil, you turn it, you mix it, you refine it, you expose it, you prepare it, and then all this chaos becomes fertility, and potential becomes eventually growth. This is not what we would just call labor, it is controlled transformation. Orgia, a ritual action. Now, from this same field, we get Orgion, Orgia, sacred rites, mystical ceremonies, practices of initiation. To initiate mean to cause something to begin, to set something in motion. These were not spectacles for passive observers, they were actions performed upon the participants themselves. If agriculture is the cultivation of the earth, Orgia were the cultivation of the human being, a ritual agricultural process of the soul, not entertainment. This was enacted transformation. Many Orgia were associated with Dionysus, but Dionysus was not just the god of wine, and of course the wine is symbolic. I talked about it in my video on Dionysus. Dionysus represents the breakdown of the rigid identity of a person, the release of our suppressed emotions, vitality in general, the reconnection with our primal self. And participant-centered altered states of consciousness through rhythm, music, movement, chanting, collective ecstasy. To the outsiders, it looked chaotic. To the initiates, it was a structured transformation. The Eleusinian mysteries. The most famous orgies in the Greek world were the Eleusinian mysteries, and they were dedicated to Demeter and Persephone. Initiates underwent a whole journey of loss, descent, search, revelation, return, and ancient testimony suggested that those who completed these rites no longer feared death. They were never the same and no longer afraid to die. Something had been transformed inside them at the very, very, very deep level. And people that came out of the mysteries were becoming active members of the polis, generals, politicians, priests, philosophers, and so on. Why sexualization is a misunderstanding. We have the symbolism of fertility here, yes? So this symbolism existed, but reducing the orgia to sexual activity misses their whole function. These rituals aimed at the opposite, at purification, reorientation, integration, rebirth, and they address the entire human being, body, emotion, imagination, and intellect. The totality of what it means to be a human being, all of it. In modern terms, we could call Orgia a form of consciousness technology, psychotechnologia, not through machines, through techniques, through a series of techniques, through myth, symbol, motion, ritual, collective experience. Ancient cultures understood that real transformation requires action. You were meant to change, not to just believe or to pray. You were meant to live in truth and to develop free will. And in order to do that, you have to confront yourself. The loss of the sacred action and tradition. Over the centuries, especially under later moral frameworks and a gradual power shift, The old ecstatic rites were no longer seen or understood within their original context. They began to be portrayed as dangerous, as immoral, shameful, and the word Orgia shifted from sacred rites to uncontrolled immorality. When a society or a power wants to reshape the mindset of its people, it rarely begins with abstract arguments, it begins with symbols. And with these symbols, went those who preserved their meaning: priests, philosophers, teachers, initiates. The most educated members of society were often the least willing to abandon the old worldview, and therefore the most difficult to assimilate. Some were marginalized, some were silenced, some adapted and reinterpreted the past, trying to bridge the gap between the two worlds, and others disappeared from the record entirely. When knowledge cannot be easily replaced, it must first be dismantled. And when it cannot be discredited, it is slowly removed. Eventually, the meaning of the orgies narrowed down to what we know today, just corruption. So a profound spiritual concept became a caricature, and participants were accused of demonolatry and even corruption of the soul. And not only the rituals, the entire pagan world that produced them, the myths, the philosophy, spirituality, all of it was increasingly described as impure or misguided. What was seen as sacred became suspicious. Centuries after the official Christianization of the Roman Empire, remnants of the older world still survived in remote regions. In parts of southern Greece, for example, missionaries were sent to convert populations that were still preserving pre-Christian practices. And one of the most famous figures was Nikon the Metanoite, Nikon the Repent. His mission was not to introduce an entirely new worldview. His mission was to complete a transition that had already taken generations. Because what happens is that tradition, belief systems do not vanish overnight. They retreat, they hide. They are found in mountains, in villages, into private rituals, into memory, into habits, into books, into whispers between people. And sometimes they endure far longer than official narratives suggest. I remember when I was 12 or 13, and my father was reading a book about the history of our region in southern Greece. It's called Mani, near Sparta. And he was very surprised. He was shocked by something he had never learned in school. That the area had been Christianized very, very late, long after the rest of the empire. As I grew older and began exploring Greek culture more deeply, started observing things, I started to see contradictions, many contradictions, not a single thing, like lots of little fragments. Then I started opening old dictionaries, and then I was observing our traditional customs, our words, expressions we are using, and people don't even know why they are using them today. All of these were little symbols that were pointing somewhere beyond the official narrative. So it felt like discovering small bits and pieces of a broken vase that were scattered all over, across time. So slowly and patiently you start gathering little bits and pieces, and you are trying to reconstruct the shape of what once was there. And the more pieces you find, the clearer it becomes. And many of those pieces belong to a world very different from the one we think we inherited, and a world far older and perhaps far wiser. And yet, there's a great irony here. Much of what we call today Western philosophy grew in the same cultural soil as those very mysteries. Thinkers as Plato did not emerge from a vacuum. They lived in a world where initiation, myth, ritual experience formed the very part of the intellectual landscape. For many Greeks, philosophy was not a rejection of the sacred traditions. It was an attempt to articulate the ancient sacred traditions in a rational language, so to speak. The aim of the mysteries was transformation, to see reality differently, to confront mortality, to undergo a symbolic death and rebirth while still alive. So ancient testimonies suggest that the initiates did not just learn something, they became something. And this experience was not limited to strange cults or cult believers. There were many mystery traditions all over the Greek world, and many of the most influential thinkers of the ancient world were themselves initiates or lived within the very culture that was shaped by these rites. Plato speaks about all the tradition of initiation when he's describing the ascent of the soul toward truth. The Pythagorean communities blended philosophy, mathematics, practice into a unified way of life. And even Cicero later on, he was saying about the mysteries that they do not only teach how to live better, but how to die without fear. Philosophy as articulated mystery. For many Greeks, philosophy did not replace the mysteries. It kind of translated them. Myth was a concept of the very labyrinth of your mind and your consciousness, and ritual was shared experience. And your vision of all of this became dialogue. So at the heart of all of this, we have the same question. What must a human being become in order to live fully and die without terror? And the mysteries answered this through experience. And then we have philosophy who answered all of this through reflection. But both pointed towards transformation, not just information like today. To be initiated was not simply to know stuff. It was to undergo a change of being, to cross a threshold from ordinary existence to a deeper awareness of life and death and meaning. The mysteries were not just doctrines, they reshaped perception. So what this route reveals? If we gather the entire family of words we discussed, we can see a pattern. Ωργή, inner force; ωρέγομαι, directed striving; óργανον, instrument; έργον, action fulfilled; γεωργία, transformation of nature, of physis; ώργια, transformation of the human being, of the very physis of the human being. This is not random. It reflects a whole worldview in which life unfolds through activated potential. I think that the most important takeaway from this video is that ancient Greek culture does not see transformation as something that happens automatically. It required preparation, structure, participation, action. Ώρgια were not some kind of weird escape from reality. They were encounters with a deeper layer of it. So next time you hear the word orgy, remember all of this, that it once described humanity's attempt to awaken itself. The ancients knew very well that we are not born finished, that we are like like the earth, waiting to be cultivated, to be initiated, is to stop being a passive observer of life and to become a practitioner of it. If this perspective started changing how you see ancient language and ritual, consider subscribing, because many of the most important ideas of our civilization are hidden not in ruins, but in the words we use every day without even understanding them. And that's exactly what this channel is about: awakening what history could not erase.